This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hello, and welcome to what will be the first of 5 episodes on a podcast series that I'm calling The Waves of Change, Immigration in the United States. Now, this is a focus of immigration and its effect in the United States in the 19th century. And as this will be the first of 5 episodes, I would like to begin with this episode, The Founding Waves Immigration Before 1860. So hello, students, and welcome to Mr. Hutchings History. Today, we're diving into the first episode of our promised series, Waves of Change, Immigration in the USA. In this episode, we'll examine the founding waves of immigration to the United States before 1860, focusing on the British, German, and Irish immigrants who arrived during this transformative period. Together, we'll uncover their motivations, challenges, and contributions, and the ways they shaped America's social, economic, and cultural landscape. Let's begin by situating ourselves in the historical context. Between 1840 and 1860, America was in the midst of rapid territorial expansion and industrialization. The lure of opportunity and freedom attracted millions from across the Atlantic, making the United States a land of hope for some, but also a site of struggle and discrimination. So I'd like to begin with the immigrant groups that appeared between 1840 and 1860. First, with the British. As the largest immigrant group in the early 19th century, the British came for reasons tied to opportunity and stability rather than desperation. They had push factors. Industrialization in Britain disrupted traditional trades and crafts, displacing skilled workers like machinists and carpenters. The shift from manual labor to mechanized production left many British tradespeople seeking steady work. Population growth in rural areas in Britain caused overcrowding, pushing British families to consider emigration. There were pull factors. America's growing economy offered better wages and abundant opportunities for skilled laborers. For example, British miners contributed to the growing coal and iron industries in Pennsylvania. For the settlement patterns of the British tended to disperse more evenly across the eastern and midwestern United States. Many British worked in urban centers, contributing to infrastructure projects like canals and railroads. Next, we have the Germans, a diverse group with equally diverse reasons for emigration. By 1850, Germans were the second largest immigrant group in the United States. The push factors for Germans included widespread food shortages which plagued Europe in the 1840s, particularly affecting rural German communities. And a second push factor, the failed revolutions of 1848 in continental Europe, which sought democratic reforms, drove political dissidents, sometimes called 48ers, to seek refuge in America. The pull factors that affected Germans included America's promise of land ownership, which was particularly appealing to the Germans. In Germany, inheritance laws often left younger siblings with no claim to family land, prompting many of these German younger siblings to immigrate to the United States. A second pull factor was railroad companies, which actively recruited German settlers to develop agricultural regions in the Midwest, offering financial incentives. Now, one might ask, why would an American railroad company want to recruit or attract agricultural workers? Well, simply for trade. Agricultural products were something to be bought and sold and moved along railroads. So, as Germans were recruited by railroad companies to come to the Midwest and grow their crops, Railroad companies then had something, a product, agriculture, that they could ship to American cities. So it was a mutually beneficial relationship that railroad companies would build, and then they would recruit German farmers to make use of the land that the railroad was going through. It's actually quite a smart idea. Well, the settlement patterns of the Germans included that Germans immigrated primarily to the Midwest, in states like Wisconsin, Ohio, and Minnesota. The Germans brought advanced agricultural practices, such as crop rotation, and the Germans transformed the Midwest into a vital breadbasket for the nation. The Germans' emphasis on education led to the introduction of the kindergarten system, which became a foundational part of American public education. Finally, let's discuss the Irish, whose story is deeply tied to tragedy and resilience. For the push factors the Irish experienced, the Great Potato Famine of 1845 to 1852 is perhaps the most famous. The Great Potato Famine devastated Ireland's primary food source, leading to starvation and economic collapse in Ireland. Entire Irish villages were depopulated as families fled starvation for the United States. A second push factor that the Irish experienced were British colonial policies which made the famine worse, as Irish tenant farmers were often forced to export food crops even during this crisis. A truly heartbreaking story where Irish farms did grow plenty, but very difficult British policies forced Irish farmers to sell their food crops, leaving the Irish with nothing for themselves to eat. A pull factor that brought the Irish to the United States, the U.S. was seen as a refuge where Irish families could rebuild their lives. Many Irish immigrants were encouraged by letters from relatives who had already settled in America, sharing stories of survival and modest success. The Irish settlement patterns, unlike the Germans, the Irish overwhelmingly settled in urban areas such as New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. These American cities offered immediate employment, though often in low paying and in hazardous jobs. Many Irish women worked as domestic servants, while Irish men labored in construction, including the building of canals, roads, railroads, and other infrastructure. There were challenges and contributions for these immigrants. There were the first challenge, and I'll point out three challenges: cultural tensions, economic exploitation, and social adjustments. In cultural tensions, Irish Catholics faced systematic discrimination in a predominantly Protestant society. The rise of anti immigrant and anti Catholic movements, such as the Know Nothing Party, reflected fears of Irish political influence and religious differences. Discriminatory signs reading, "No Irish need apply," symbolized widespread prejudice in the job market. There was economic exploitation. Immigrants often worked in harsh conditions for minimal wages. The Irish, in particular, were assigned dangerous jobs in mines and on railroads with little regard for safety. British and German immigrants faced less overt discrimination but were often seen as competitors for skilled jobs. And finally, social adjustments. Immigrants struggled to preserve their cultural identities while integrating into American society. Enclaves like New York's Little Italy and Germantown provided a sense of community and cultural preservation for those who made efforts to hold on to their identities, but it was still a struggle. There were contributions. Three of them I would point out: economic contributions, cultural contributions, and community formation. For the economic contributions of the immigrants, British immigrants brought industrial skills that supported the development of factories and transportation infrastructure. German immigrants revolutionized American agriculture, making the Midwest a hub of wheat and corn production, which it still is to this day. Irish labor brought much of the infrastructure, or I'm sorry, Irish labor built most of the infrastructure that allowed the U.S. economy to expand westward. Cultural contributions include that Germans introduced traditions like the Christmas tree and kindergartens, shaping family and educational norms in the United States. Irish immigrants enriched American music and storytelling traditions, influencing genres like folk and bluegrass music. And finally, community formation. Immigrant neighborhoods became cultural and economic centers. These immigrant neighborhoods hosted celebrations, preserved languages, and introduced unique architectural styles. Historians offer varied interpretations of this period. Oscar Handlin wrote The Uprooted in 1951. Handlin celebrates the resilience of these immigrants, emphasizing their transformative impact on the United States, its economy, and its culture. Oscar Handlin views their struggles as integral to the American story of progress. Sociologist Howard Zinn critiques this. In his book, A People's History of the United States, which was originally published in 1980, Howard Zinn critiques the romanticized narrative of immigration. Zinn argues that while immigrants contribute significantly, they were often exploited by industrialists and denied upward mobility into American society. And the last I'll bring forward is a perspective of cultural pluralism. Horace Kalin highlights how immigrant communities maintain their distinct identities while enriching American society as a whole. Kalin rejects the idea of a melting pot in favor of the idea of cultural diversity. The waves of immigration before 1860 laid the groundwork for America's development as a diverse and industrious nation. The British, Germans, and Irish brought not only their labor, but also their traditions and resilience. As we reflect on this era, consider the following questions. How did the motivations for immigration differ among the British, German, and Irish? What were challenges that each group faced, and how did each group respond to their challenges? And finally, how can we reconcile the contributions of immigrants with the discrimination they experienced? In our next episode, we'll explore the second wave of immigration from 1865 to 1915, examining how new groups diversified America further while facing new challenges. Thank you for listening to Mr. Hutchings History, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.